Jasmine Crockett stood backstage at the CNN town hall, her navy blue pantsuit impeccably tailored, her heart pounding like a distant war drum beneath her composed exterior. She could hear every word booming from the stage, where Kash Patel, the former chief of staff to the Secretary of Defense under President Trump, was already in full attack mode. Patel's voice was confident, cutting, and practiced. "Crockett is just another progressive with zero understanding of how national security works," he declared, arms sweeping dramatically before a crowd split between cheers and sharp-edged boos. From behind the curtain, Crockett watched him, a figure of establishment power, in a crisp gray suit, radiating smug certainty, as he added with a smirk, "She's all talk, no substance." Typical of someone who's never handled classified material, the conservative audience members roared with approval, while others shifted uncomfortably. He was performing and they were buying it. What he didn't know was that Jasmine Crockett had come prepared. She wasn't just bringing her voice to this fight. She had brought evidence, tightly gripping a slim but heavy folder tucked beneath her arm. She felt the weight of more than just documents that held truths that could detonate Patel's narrative in real time. This wasn't just another political sparring match. This was her opportunity to flip the script on live national television. And when the host, Chris Wallace, announced, "Now joining us is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett," she exhaled once, slowly, then stepped into the blaze of the studio lights. This would not be his moment. This would be hers. The crowd buzzed as she entered. Her stride was deliberate, her eyes focused, her presence a contrast so sharp it nearly sliced the tension in half. Where Patel had the air of a Washington power player, Crockett carried something rarer, the gravity of courtroom precision, the poise of lived experience, and the moral clarity of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. "The audience," murmured as Chris Wallace reset the stage. Patel stood beside his podium, arms folded, expression unreadable. He looked confident, but not ready. Wallace turned to him. "Mr. Patel, you've raised serious concerns about Congresswoman Crockett's qualifications on matters of national security. Let's now give her the floor to respond." As Crockett sat across from him, her folder neatly placed beside her, calm demeanor belied the storm she was about to unleash. "Thank you for having me," she began, voice firm, tone unshaken. "I've heard Mr. Patel's comments, and while I appreciate the service of every former official, especially those who claim to speak in defense of our democracy, I think it's time we clarify some facts." Backstage, her aide handed a quiet signal to the production team. On it, "Be ready for Exhibit A." Inside the folder was a time-stamped memo, a leaked email, a security clearance form, and a contradiction so explosive it could shatter Patel's credibility in a single click. The studio lights hummed overhead. Tension buzzed in the wires, in the walls, in the widening eyes of the audience. Because this wasn't just about two politicians arguing policy. This was about truth versus theatrics, experience versus entitlement, receipts versus rhetoric, and Kash Patel, for all his polished bravado, was about to learn what happens when a trial lawyer walks into a studio armed with evidence. As the moderator leaned in, Jasmine Crockett adjusted her microphone, her face resolute, her voice calm. "Let's get something straight," she said. "I may be new to Congress, but I've spent years in courtrooms where you don't get to win just because you talk loud. You win because you bring facts. And tonight Mr. Patel brought mine." A hushed ripple passed through the studio. This was no longer a debate. This was a reckoning. Those who had such unique experiences in the previous administration, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett began, letting the word unique linger just long enough to draw a ripple of nervous laughter from the crowd. The sarcasm wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Kash Patel, whose smile tensed ever so slightly at the corners. Crockett pressed on. "I find it fascinating that Mr. Patel would question my qualifications, when in fact, my role on the House Judiciary Committee includes explicit oversight of national security and intelligence matters. That's not extracurricular in the job description." She said it coolly, but firmly. Her voice was calm, collected. This wasn't her first confrontation, and it wouldn't be her last. But Patel, unable to resist, leaned forward in interruption. "Committee assignments don't equal expertise, Congresswoman," he said, voice rising. "I've handled top secret intelligence firsthand. I've been in the room where real decisions were made, global decisions. With all due respect, reading briefings isn't the same as writing them." His supporters broke into applause, scattered but loud, as the studio buzzed with energy. Wallace made an attempt to interject, but Patel plowed forward. "The American people deserve leadership that understands the stakes, leaders who faced threats, not just tweeted about them." He raised his voice now, fully stepping into his rhythm like a prosecutor in front of a jury. "When was the last time you were briefed on a level 1 security threat? Have you ever made a decision, any decision based on real-time classified intel that could impact American lives?" The barrage was calculated, meant to overwhelm and discredit. In the conservative section of the audience, heads nodded in approval. But on the other side, unease began to stir. It was becoming clear Patel was not debating. He was attempting to dominate. Wallace, finally raising his voice, cut in. Mr. Patel, let's allow the Congresswoman to respond. Crockett hadn't flinched. She adjusted her microphone with deliberate calm, her expression unchanged, though her eyes had narrowed just slightly. Thank you, Chris, she began, then turned directly to Patel. It's interesting to hear Mr. Patel express such concern about the proper handling of classified information. Given his own record, there was a sudden shift in the air, a murmur of anticipation. Crockett glanced at the folder beside her but left it closed at least for now. But before I address that, she continued, voice firm, let me clarify. Something. Oversight is not sitting on the sidelines. It is the job. The American people elected me, not to sit quietly while unelected former officials lecture us about patriotism, but to ask questions, demand answers, and defend the Constitution. Patel scoffed audibly, shaking his head in open dismissal. His reaction was noted not just by Crockett, but by the cameras, by the audience, and by Chris Wallace, who raised an eyebrow. Furthermore, Crockett said, her voice intensifying, my background as a civil rights attorney taught me something Washington often forgets, that national security and civil liberties are not enemies, they're co-pilots. In any healthy democracy, they must exist in tension, not in opposition. Patel smirked again, interrupting with a mocking tone. Beautiful words, Congresswoman, really, but again where's the substance? The studio's energy shifted. His dismissiveness was starting to wear thin with parts of the audience. Wallace turned to him, sharp now. Mr. Patel, please. You've had your say. Let the Congresswoman finish. Patel gave a theatrical bow of the head, hands up in mock surrender. The smirk remained. Crockett's eyes didn't leave his. Since you're so insistent on discussing the responsible handling of sensitive information, she said, reaching for the folder at her side, let's talk about yours. She opened the folder. The entire studio seemed to lean forward. While Mr. Patel questions my qualifications, the American people deserve to know that there are serious questions about his conduct, questions raised in official investigations. Wallace leaned in. Patel blinked. Crockett continued, her tone shifting to one of precise legal command. Mr. Patel, are you familiar with the Inspector General's report, dated June 2022, regarding unauthorized disclosures of classified information during the presidential transition? The words struck like a thunderclap. The audience hushed. Patel's expression faltered. I'm familiar with a lot of reports, he replied, deflecting. You'll have to be more specific. Crockett nodded slightly to the production team. A large screen behind them lit up. Page 47, paragraph 3, she said, her voice now sharpened like a blade. It names you, Mr. Patel, in connection with what the IG described as, quote, troubling breaches of established security protocols. She looked directly at him. Those aren't my words, they're the Inspector General's. For a moment, the entire studio went still. Even Chris Wallace looked taken aback. The cameras caught Patel's face, a flicker of something behind the practiced calm. Hesitation, panic, regret. The moment had turned. Crockett wasn't on defense anymore. She was leading. And Patel? He was standing on the edge of the trap he had walked into all by himself. The smirk vanished from Kash Patel's face, replaced by a tight-lipped expression of forced composure. For the first time, his voice lacked its usual bravado, as he replied, that report is taken completely out of context. He glanced toward the moderator, as though searching for an escape hatch. Portions of it had been disputed by multiple officials. Crockett didn't blink. I thought you might say that, she said, lifting yet another document from her folder. The rustle of the paper echoed in the quiet room. That's why I brought the follow-up assessment. She held it up to the cameras for a moment before continuing. This one's dated September 2023. It reaffirms the original findings and specifically states that the disputed sections did not include the incidents connected to your actions. Mr. Patel? The atmosphere in the studio thickened. Even supporters had grown quiet, their earlier confidence now dimmed by the cascade of official evidence. Others in the audience leaned forward in their seats, fully aware that they were no longer watching a debate. They were witnessing a dismantling. This is a political hit job, Patel snapped, raising his voice again in a last-ditch effort to regain control. Typical of the left dredging up old accusations to distract from their own incompetence. But Crockett remained utterly unfazed. She turned toward the audience, addressing not just those in the room, but the millions watching. At home, these are not blog posts or partisan headlines. Mr. Patel, she said, holding the folder steady in her hand. These are official government documents produced by your own administration's Inspector General. If these accusations were truly debunked, I'd love to see the evidence. But you haven't provided any. The crowd erupted. Half the audience broke into thunderous applause for Crockett's.com precision. The other half shouted in protest, desperate to drown her out. Chris Wallace struggled to regain control as the confrontation surged into a full-blown spectacle. Onstage, Patel's face was flushed a deep red. His polished composure had all but disintegrated. Gone was the smug confidence, the casual interruptions. In its place sat a man who had grossly underestimated his opponent. He'd expected a freshman, Congresswoman, a political lightweight, a soundbite machine he could bulldoze. Instead, he found himself cornered, his own record projected in full color on screens behind him, and Crockett wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. As Wallace finally restored order, she calmly reached for another file from her folder. "There's more," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Shall we talk about your December testimony before Congress, specifically where you appeared to contradict your own previous statements about handling classified information and security clearances?" Patel's face flickered with alarm. The trap was closing, and he knew it. The audience sat in silence, stunned. This was supposed to be his ambush. Someone whispered, but now Patel sat frozen in his chair, his gaze bouncing nervously between Crockett, Wallace, and the towering screen behind them. Crockett stood slowly. "Let's be crystal clear about what's happening here," she said, her voice rising, calm yet commanding. "Mr. Patel came onto this stage questioning my qualifications, my credibility, and my understanding of national security." She turned, gesturing toward the screen where the Inspector General's report remained displayed. "But these documents from your administration clearly state that Mr. Patel himself was cited for what they described as significant deviations from established security protocols while serving at the Department of Defense." Wallace, now back in control of the room, turned to Patel. Double quotes. "Mr. Patel, would you like to respond to these allegations?" Patel straightened his tie, visibly struggling to collect himself. "What Congresswoman Crockett is doing," he said, forcing his voice into steadiness, "is exactly the kind of political theater that weakens trust in government. She's isolated incidents, spinning them for dramatic effect. That report, it was politically motivated." Crockett raised an eyebrow. Her voice, when it returned, was like a dagger wrapped in velvet. "Politically motivated," she repeated. "The Inspector General who authored that report was appointed by President Donald J. Trump, the very president you served under." She let the silence stretch. "Are you suggesting your own administration's appointees were part of some left-wing conspiracy?" The question hit like a thunderclap. Patel opened his mouth but said nothing. Cameras zoomed in on his silence. The audience watched, phones recording, knowing they were seeing a turning point. "I'll continue," Crockett said, not waiting for his reply. She nodded to the production team. The screen behind them changed again, revealing a transcript of a sworn congressional testimony. "This is from your appearance before the House Oversight Committee on December 13, 2021. She said. She read aloud, "I never shared any classified information outside of authorized channels." She looked up. "That was your sworn statement. And yet, the Inspector General's report describes 3 separate incidents where classified information was shared improperly under your oversight." She stared directly at him. "Would you like to explain the discrepancy, Mr. Patel?" Patel's face darkened further. "This is absurd. You're taking things out of context. I'm quoting you directly." Crockett interrupted, her voice calm but unrelenting. "These are your words, Mr. Patel, under oath." The contrast between them could not have been starker. Crockett stood tall, confident, armed with facts. Patel sat increasingly defensive, agitated, and exposed. But she wasn't done, and perhaps the most troubling part, she said, pulling out one last document, "is what you allegedly did after these violations were reported." She signaled to the screen again. This time an email thread appeared, names redacted, timestamps visible. These internal communications showed that shortly after being notified of these breaches, you attempted to have the individuals who reported them reassigned to other departments. She turned to the audience. "Some might call that retaliation." Gasps echoed through the studio. Even Wallace leaned in, stunned by the implications. The studio wasn't just watching a debate anymore. They were watching a reckoning. Patel sat frozen, visibly rattled, the confident edge he'd wielded so effectively at the start, now fully dulled. His signature smirk had been replaced by a grim, tight-lipped silence, his composure cracking under the weight of evidence and public exposure. He finally spoke, but his voice had lost its earlier certainty. "That is a complete fabrication," he insisted, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Those staffing decisions were made strictly for operational reasons, routine restructuring. They had nothing to do with any reports." Crockett didn't flinch. She simply nodded, as though she'd been expecting that exact answer. "Interesting," she said coolly, "because I also have here." She reached into her folder and retrieved yet another document, a sworn affidavit from James Keller, former Deputy Director of Operations. She held up the paper for the cameras and began to read. "Mr. Patel explicitly stated, we need to clean house of anyone who doesn't understand how things work now." She paused, letting the words hang in the charged silence. "This conversation, according to Keller, took place just 3 days after the first reported security breach. You could have heard a pin drop. Even Chris Wallace, who had deftly navigated countless volatile interviews, appeared momentarily at a loss." The audience that had cheered Patel's early bravado now shifted in their seats, a collective discomfort settling over the room. Some of his supporters looked down at their hands. Others avoided eye contact with the stage altogether. "This is character assassination?" Patel sputtered, finally breaking the silence. His voice rose in pitch, laced with panic. You come on national television with these selectively edited documents, and try to. They're not edited. Mr. Patel, Crockett interjected, her tone firm but not hostile. They're part of the official government record, public record, and they tell a very different story than the one you've been selling. She turned, squarely facing the audience, her voice steady and deliberate. Let me be clear. I didn't bring these documents to score political points. I brought them because national security is not a game. It's not a political stunt. It's too important for hypocrisy. Her words landed with force. When Mr. Patel questions my qualifications, while standing on a record riddled with serious procedural violations, the American people deserve to know the truth. The audience erupted, not just the section that had supported her from the start, but from across the ideological spectrum. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about authenticity, a rare moment of clarity amid the noise. Chris Wallace leaned forward, clearly shaken but maintaining composure. Mr. Patel, he said, turning back to the visibly flustered former official, would you like to respond to these specific allegations regarding retaliation against staffers who reported security violations? Patel adjusted his microphone, cleared his throat, and looked down for a long moment. When he finally spoke, the fire in his voice was gone. These are complex matters, he said weakly, and they can't be reduced to sound bites. National security operations are full of nuance. Decisions that may appear questionable to outsiders can make perfect sense in the full context. But it was a non-answer. Everyone in the room could tell. The audible scoffs from the crowd confirmed it. Crockett saw her opening and stepped forward, delivering the final blow. You know what, Mr. Patel, she said, locking eyes with him. I actually agree with you. National security is complex. It's nuanced. That's why it requires something more than just experience. It requires integrity, transparency, accountability. She tapped the stack of documents, now neatly arranged in front of her. It requires leaders who follow the same rules they expect others to follow. Then, calmly, she turned to the crowd. So when Mr. Patel questions whether I am qualified to speak on these issues, perhaps he should ask himself whether someone with a documented history of breaching those very rules should be casting any stones at all. The room exploded. Applause erupted so loud it nearly drowned out Wallace's voice as he attempted to transition. The camera panned across the audience, faces lit up with admiration, surprise, and something more, a sense that they had witnessed history being made. Some stood to their feet. Phones were already raised, capturing the moment for the millions who hadn't seen it live. Patel sat unmoving, his face pale, his jaw clenched. The ambush he had planned had boomeranged. What began as a confident attempt to dismantle a freshman congresswoman's credibility had evolved into a public reckoning of his integrity. Wallace, ever the professional, tried to maintain structure. Mr. Patel, you have 30 seconds for a closing response. Patel took a breath, visibly collecting himself, and straightened his jacket. The American people are smart, he said. They can see through political theater. My record speaks for itself, and I stand by it. What Congresswoman Crockett fails to mention, your time is up, Wallace interjected crisply, then turned to her. Congresswoman Crockett, your final 30 seconds. She nodded, her tone shifting to something more solemn. I didn't come here tonight to attack Mr. Patel personally. I came here to defend a principle that national security requires more than talking points and titles. It requires trust, it requires oversight, and it requires that those with power be held to the same standards as those without. She looked into the camera. When we make truth partisan, America los. That's why I ask the hard questions. Not because I lack experience, but because it's what the people elected me to do. The applause was thunderous, full-throated, sustained, undeniable. That as the camera pulled back into a wide shot, the contrast was stunning. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, composed, her hands resting lightly on the folder that had changed the night. Kash Patel, slouched in his chair, stared at the floor, the image of a man who had come ready to fight, but left with wounds entirely. Self-inflicted, the producer signaled for commercial, but not before the last shot. The audience, standing, phones in the air, faces alight with electricity. They were already tweeting, already posting clips, already sending the moment into viral orbit. No one had expected this CNN town hall to be anything more than another partisan showdown, but by the end of the night, it became the political moment America would be talking about for weeks. And Patel rose from his seat slowly, quietly, as the room around him buzzed with a new reality. He had lost, and the whole world had seen it happen. Kash Patel ignored the outstretched hand of a producer, attempting to adjust his microphone as he left the stage. His jaw clenched, his face flushed with frustration. He stormed backstage at a clipped pace, not waiting for staff or protocol. Within seconds, he was surrounded by his aides, the tension palpable. Get me on the phone with Greg at Fox, he muttered through gritted teeth. We need to get ahead of this narrative immediately. There was no acknowledgement of the applause, still echoing in the studio, or of the millions watching the moment that had just unfolded live across the country. Patel, who had entered with calculated swagger, now moved like a man walking out of a battlefield, beaten but unwilling to admit it yet. Meanwhile, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett remained in her seat. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. Instead, she calmly accepted a bottle of water from her aide, her fingers still resting lightly on the stack of documents that had dismantled Patel's argument. Her face reflected a quiet confidence, almost surprise, at how overwhelmingly the crowd had received her. During the commercial break, Chris Wallace, typically the model of neutrality, leaned over with a half-smile. "Congresswoman, that was unexpected," he said. Crockett glanced at him with a knowing look. "Sometimes the truth is," she replied softly. Outside the studio, the digital world erupted into chaos. Within just 5 minutes of the segment, #Jasmine Crockett and #Crockett Receipts were trending across social media platforms. Clips of her calmly presenting the Inspector General's report and confronting Patel with unwavering composure went viral at record speed. TikTok flooded with side-by-side reactions. Instagram Reels reposted the mic drop moments with captions like, "Jasmine Crockett just ended Kash Patel's political future, live on CNN." One viral tweet that received over 50,000 likes in 10 minutes featured a split-screen Patel smirking confidently at the start of the debate, contrasted with his visibly shaken face after the IG report reveal. The caption read simply, "How it started versus how it ended." Right-wing media personalities scrambled to mount a defense. Conservative influencers tried to spin the moment as a political ambush, calling Crockett's evidence selective and coordinated. But the damage was already spreading beyond the echo chambers. Even some right-leaning viewers and strategists admitted on live streams and podcasts that Patel had been outmaneuvered. "Patel walked into that one," admitted a well-known conservative commentator. "Never underestimate your opponent." First rule of any real debate. When the commercial break ended, Wallace reappeared on screen and welcomed viewers back with the kind of dry understatement he had become famous for. "Well, we've certainly had an illuminating discussion on national security credentials." The camera panned back to the stage. Patel had returned, but the contrast was striking. The relaxed confidence he had exuded earlier had completely evaporated. His posture was rigid. His eyes avoided Crockett. Gone was the swagger. In its place stood a man clearly aware that this appearance was slipping through his fingers. "Wallace," turned to him. "Before we move to audience questions, I want to give Mr. Patel an opportunity to address the documents presented by Congresswoman Crockett regarding his handling of security protocols." Patel cleared his throat, sitting forward stiffly. His voice was steadier than before, but the spark of control was gone. "What we saw was a classic Washington gotcha moment," he began, trying to summon the authority he once held. The Congresswoman presented selectively edited documents without full context. These were internal administrative matters that were resolved appropriately. "This is political theater, and Americans are tired of it." But the response was tepid. The audience remained cool. A few people visibly rolled their eyes. Others crossed their arms. The room knew better. Crockett didn't interrupt. She waited for him to finish, then leaned in slightly, her voice still calm and even. "With respect, Mr. Patel, those documents are not edited. They're public records, available to any citizen through the Freedom of Information Act. My office obtained them legally and transparently. They are complete, unclassified, and available to every American who wants to read them." She paused, then added with measured force, "And given the subject of tonight's discussion, national security, I think the public deserves nothing less than full honesty from those who position themselves as experts." The first audience question came from a woman who introduced herself as a registered independent. "Mr. Patel," she asked, her tone calm but firm, "given what we've just learned, do you still believe Congresswoman Crockett lacks the qualifications to speak on national security?" The studio held its breath. Cameras zoomed in on Patel's face as he hesitated. His answer came slower now, more clipped. "My point was and remains that theoretical knowledge is not the same as operational experience. Everything else is a distraction." But his words fell flat. The crowd didn't respond. The spell had been broken. As the town hall continued, the contrast between Patel and Crockett only grew more stark. Patel's responses became shorter, more defensive. Crockett, by contrast, began expanding beyond the documents, speaking eloquently about the intersection of civil rights, constitutional oversight, and national defense. Her calm voice cut through the noise like a scalpel. By the end of the hour-long broadcast, it was clear to everyone what had been intended as Patel's triumphant return to national media had backfired spectacularly. The narrative had flipped. He hadn't discredited Jasmine Crockett, he had catapulted her into the national spotlight. Outside the studio, the ripple effects were already in motion. Major outlets raced to file headlines. The Washington Post, "Crockett's Receipts. Congresswoman confronts Trump ally with security records," live on CNN. Politico, "From prosecutor to powerhouse. Jasmine Crockett's legal precision shakes." National Stage, Reuters, "Patel faces fallout after televised clash over security protocols." Even Fox News couldn't ignore the moment, though their headline aimed to soften the blow. "Patel ambushed with selective docs on CNN." Uncalls out political theater. Backstage, the political calculus was shifting fast. Democratic operatives who had once considered Crockett a rising but still junior lawmaker were texting each other with a new urgency. One strategist wrote, "She just became a national figure. Overnight you felt it too, right?" Screens across the Capitol flickered with replayed clips. Phones buzzed in offices from D.C. to Austin. Fundraising teams were already preparing email blasts. Cable producers were scheduling Crockett for interviews on MSNBC, The View, and even 60 Minutes. She had walked onto that stage to defend her credibility. She walked off it as the future face of a new generation of political leadership, and Kash Patel. He was left backstage, still on the phone with Fox, trying to control a narrative that had already slipped far beyond his grasp. Back in Washington offices, phones were lighting up with one repeated message. "Did you see Jasmine Crockett on CNN?" Political staffers, advisors, and strategists scrambled to react in real time. One senior Democratic campaign manager texted, "We need to get her to headline the fundraiser next month. This woman just changed the game." Across the aisle, Republican operatives were equally panicked. Who the hell prepped Patel for this? He walked into a buzzsaw. One furious message read. Another added grimly, "That clip is going to be replaying on every platform through the weekend. We're going to lose control of the narrative." But the moment didn't stay confined to Capitol Hill. By the evening, it had spilled into the bloodstream of American culture. Late-night comedy writers scrambled to rewrite monologues, each one racing to land the most viral zinger. One talk show host opened their segment with a punchline that quickly made rounds online. Kash Patel learned an important lesson today. If you're gonna come for the congresswoman, you better bring more than a suit and a smirk, and maybe check if she brought a folder first. While Patel retreated behind closed doors, making panicked media calls and triaging the backlash, Jasmine Crockett sat quietly in her hotel room, her phone buzzing nonstop. Notifications poured in from every direction. Ms. Emails, mentions, reposts. Colleagues from both sides of the aisle sent texts of respect. Constituents flooded her inbox with messages of pride. Even celebrities joined the chorus, reposting clips and publicly applauding her poise, clarity, and command. Her social media accounts exploded. Within just a few hours, she gained more than 200,000 new followers across platforms. On Twitter, hashtags like #Jasmine Crockett, #bringing receipts, and #Crockett Effect trended globally. But one message stood out among the flood. A text from Democratic House leadership simply read, "Impressive work today. Let's talk committee assignments when you're back in D.C." For Kash Patel, the aftermath was far less forgiving. Conservative networks that had previously welcomed him now hesitated to book him. His own allies texted him not with support, but with confusion and concern. Messages ranged from "what happened out there" to "here's how you can spin this, and maybe take a break from TV appearances for a while." The moment had outgrown both of them. Within a week, the confrontation had taken on a life of its own in political culture. Bringing receipts became shorthand for walking into a political debate armed with hard documented facts. A meme format was born, split-screen images captioned, "Kash Patel thought he was debating a freshman. He got Congresswoman Crockett with documents instead." T-shirts appeared online that simply read, "Check the documents." They sold out in under 24 hours. It became more than a political moment. It was a cultural metaphor, a declaration that bluster couldn't beat preparation, that talking loud couldn't outmatch knowing your stuff. In workplaces across the country, people began referencing it in meetings. "Don't Patel this, bring your Crockett energy," became an inside joke in law offices, classrooms, boardrooms, and even church meetings. The phrase echoed from D.C. to Detroit, from college campuses to courtroom corridors. But perhaps the most significant change was what it did for the two individuals at the heart of it. For Jasmine Crockett, it was nothing short of a career-defining moment. In just one nationally televised segment, she had done what usually takes years. She transformed from a promising new lawmaker to a recognized national force. Her sharp mind, calm demeanor, and relentless focus had resonated with Americans who were tired of political theater and hungry for competence. She wasn't a pundit, she wasn't a performer. She was a civil rights attorney turned lawmaker who showed up prepared, and it showed. For Kash Patel, however, the path forward became murkier. His reputation as a seasoned national security expert was deeply dented. The confrontation didn't just raise questions about his rhetoric, it resurfaced questions about his record. Those IG reports, those email chains, that sworn testimonial now attached to his name permanently in the public consciousness. Whenever he appeared on screen, the clip resurfaced. And the internet, unlike the news cycle, has an exceptionally long memory. 3 months later, when Patel was asked in an interview about the viral showdown, he tried to shrug it off. "Ancient history, politically speaking," he said with a forced smile. But the clip played again, almost immediately, on every platform. As for Crockett, she didn't use her newfound influence for self-promotion. Instead, she leaned into her work, focusing on voting rights, criminal justice reform, and government transparency. Her interviews were thoughtful. her speeches focused. Her tone remained the same, sharp, steady, and fiercely rooted in truth. When asked about the confrontation that launched her into the national spotlight, she often downplayed it. It wasn't about me or him, she'd say plainly. It was about facts. About letting the public see the truth without filters. That's my job. In a time when American political discourse often seems like a battleground of insults, deflection, and spin, Jasmine Crockett reminded the country of something timeless. Preparation still matters. Evidence still matters. And when truth is spoken, calmly and confidently backed by receipts, it has the power to change everything. Across the country. In classrooms and campaign offices, people remembered. Young women stood up in debate clubs, holding folders. Law students cited Crockett's exchange in public speaking workshops. In boardrooms, someone inevitably quoted her line, "You question my qualifications while your record says otherwise." It was no longer just a debate. It was a template, a new standard, a moment when substance finally, powerfully, cut through the noise.